the supernatural is something that isn't supposed to happen, but it does happen.
And no nation which expects to be the leader of other nations can expect to stay behind in this race for space.
What does it take to convince you that the dead do not always rest in peace?
Been brought to you by Brott's Beard Care, premium beard oil made right here in Central Florida area by Kelly Brott. Go to brottsbeardcare.com, use promo code 3beards with a capital B. You're going to save 20% off your order along with free shipping. And at this time, we would like to welcome our guest for the show, Mr. Dr. Alan G. Hunter, author of a fine book, Princess Frogs and Ugly Sisters, The Healing Power of the Grimm's Brothers' Tales. How are you, sir?
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me on the show.
Yeah, well, we are honored that you accepted. I mean, that was, when I told the guys about this, I asked them, you guys know anything about the Grimm's Brothers? And they're like, no. I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to fanboy out because this is the one I remember being, 6, 7, and reading the classic, book of all the tales, real stories of everybody's seen Disney, everybody's seen their own version of, their version of it, where there's a happily ever after, there's a happy ending. I'm like, no, Cinderella gets her feet cut off by the stepsisters. I go, people are eaten. I go, these are ones for tales, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but it was one, our mutual friend Marchetti, who got me in touch with you, and it was one thing I bounced off of him too, because one of the things I've always taken from the Grimm's Brothers' tales is I've kind of seen the 7 deadly sins aspect of it. There is a morality side to each story, whether it's greed, sloth, envy. There's always some aspect. One of the characters is, and this is these stories as they were collected by these gentlemen, were kind of showing these things, and it wasn't so much just like a scary story to scare you. This was a tale back then to teach kids, do this, there will be harm that will befall you.
Yes.
My son, he's 12 now, but he can tell you from years, he remembers, I've always told him the story of the boy who cried wolf.
Yes.
That, so for how long, it's like you can keep crying wolf, but eventually the wolf's going to eat you because nobody cares.
Nobody comes.
You said it for so many times. When there is finally a wolf, it's too late.
Yeah.
But so we'll give you the floor there. I mean, kind of talk about your book a little bit and where you came up with this theme about, and one, we'll ask you as we go through there, but just, kind of let everybody know that hasn't seen this, where you got this idea and kind of how you went about coming to this book. Yeah,
well, you've sort of described the scenario beautifully already, and that is that Disney, God bless Disney, they've made a lot of money and made a lot of people happy, and my 2 grandkids love all the new Disney characters.
Oh yeah.
And there's a lot of good stuff in there, but, and this is a big but, really, and that is we should not confuse the 2 issues here. Disney is out to make money, and they make money by entertaining us and selling us merchandise. Fine, that's a good business prospect. The difficulty is for me that when I look at what Disney has done with these tales, I see that they've been watered down, they've been sugared over, they've been distorted, and when that happens, you lose something. So I started looking at these tales with great care some years ago, because I knew that there was more in the tales really than we were getting on the screen. And what we're not getting actually is some really important psychological insights about how to grow up, how how to be full human beings, both men and women. So, if I can backpedal here for a bit,
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Everybody says the famous phrase. In fact, it was said to me because I was at a seminar with a bunch of women who were talking about how difficult it was to find eligible men. And this one woman says, oh, well, you have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find a prince.
Yeah.
And I said, wait a second, that's not in the Disney tale, which is the first tale of the book, The Frog King. I said, that's not what happens. Do you know what happens in the tale? And she said, no, she kisses the frog and he turns into a prince, right? I said, no. He says, I want to sleep in your bed beside you. And at this point, she's so outraged, she's so upset with this slimy, horrible creature. She picks him up and throws him at the wall, trying to kill him. And that's when he changes. I said, you see the difference? When you tell a man, grow up and be a man rather than being an amphibian, then you've got a prince. But if you just kiss the frog, what you get is more frogs in your life. And I remember saying this to her, and she went, I said, yeah, it's there in Disney. It's been twisted so that it's something that perhaps it shouldn't be. And that is, it subordinates women. It makes women think that they have to put up with a load of rubbish from a lot of weak, frog-like men, rather than demanding that he grow up because she's grown up. So that's the very first story of the tales. And I thought, I like the Disney tales. They're great fun. I laugh at them, and with my kids and my grandkids, wonderful. But let's not pretend that it's telling us the same degree of useful information about, how to negotiate to get a decent spouse. Because in that story, the little princess has to grow up, and the frog has to risk his life. And then they say, okay, I think this is it. That's a very different story.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That was kind of where I was bringing at, because so many people, they're just used to these stories, and then when you actually, like I was telling the guys, the story Hansel and Gretel.
Yeah.
I mean, that one is just, everybody's, oh yeah, they escaped the witch, and like, no.
No,
not
quite like that.
No, this is there. Let's just say that there's a rendering pot involved, and I mean it's pretty morbid when you get these things, and people are like, I can't believe these are for kids. I'm like, it's like you said, this isn't supposed to be this happy. Oh, I'm so warm and fuzzy in my bed. I'm going to go to sleep now. No, this one was, you do this. This is what's going to happen to you. You're supposed to. It's supposed to almost be put a fear into the child, or to, a behavior modification. And I just that was the one. That's why I was like I said, fanboying. It's like, cool. I got to talk to him about the stories I grew up.
Yes.
And we'll kind of one of the things, like too, it's on page 19 in your book. You have the 6 archetypes.
Yes.
And that, so I'll let you kind of go there, like tell people kind of what you've seen.
Okay,
in your tales.
Be happy to. I mean, I'm very happy you mentioned Hansel and Gretel, because that's a really important story. So one of the things I've seen over the years, and I've spent my life looking at literature in the Western canon. Okay, that's my profession, and that's what I do. And looking at 3,000 years of literature, which is basically all we've got. If you ask a few questions like, what does the main character do? If you ask those questions, what we can see, and in one of my other books, Stories We Need to Know, I give exhaustive examples of this. What we see is that all of the main characters are invited on a journey. Not the hero's journeys of Joseph Campbell, something slightly different. And the journey is to pass 6 milestones. 6 milestones of personal development. So, when we start with Hansel and Gretel, they would be at the very first stage of development. So their archetype, to begin with, would be innocent. They're just little kids. But then their parents decide to abandon them in the forest, and they're alone. And at that point, they move from being innocent kids trusting and loving. And these are really important things to learn, how to trust and how to love. They have that trust and love shattered, you might say, and they're left alone in the forest as the next stage, orphan. Orphan. Now, when you're an orphan, if you have any experience of orphans, you know there's only one rule, and that is find someone to attach to. And that's what happens to Hansel and Gretel. They find a little house in the woods, something to attach to, which happens to be by a witch. So they've chosen the wrong person to attach to.
Well, if I remember right from the story too, wasn't it was it the axeman or the woodsman that he didn't like the kids, and so he would take them out to the woods to get rid of them. But Mom would leave breadcrumbs.
Yeah.
To allow them to come back, and then they'd come back, and then he's like, I tried to get rid of and he does it again, and then that's when I said, then you get to the witch, and then that's what I said. It's a whole different story.
One parent wants to get rid of them and kill them, basically, and the other parent is soft-hearted. When you're a kid, when you're a baby or a small kid like 4 or 5, you begin to realize that one parent is softer than the other.
And if I remember, it was because of food. It wasn't like he was this evil guy that just, I don't like kids. No, it was just there wasn't enough food.
There's not enough food.
So we just got to get rid of the kids.
Got to get rid of the kids. That's what they used to do. Apparently, they would abandon children in the forest. It's a quicker death than starvation because some animal would come along and eat them. So different times, different necessities, and there they are. They're orphans. And they find the witch, and the witch basically imprisons them and makes them work for her. And they do this until they realize, they're going to be turned into food one of these days. So it's a cruel world. Talk about dog eat dog. It's person eat person. When they realize, especially the little boy, when he realizes he's on the menu soon, he's being fattened up. He doesn't know what to do, but that's when the little girl gets to work to free him. So they've stopped being happy little orphans saying, "Oh, we found a safe place," and they're going to, "Oh, we've got to get out of here." Now you think about that. That's what we all do. I mean, the first time you go to a new city or a new job, we all look, let's try to make friends with somebody, find out what goes on. That's when we're in orphan mode ourselves, and we return to that mode from time to time. But the idea is to grow out of it. You find the people you can trust, and then you decide whether you want to be friends with them anymore. So here's Hansel and Gretel. They decide this is not a good deal. And so they use their inquiring selves. I call that the pilgrim. That's when the hero or the heroes or the heroine or however many people are on this journey, they start to ask the difficult questions. And you see this again and again in the Grimm brothers' stories, that someone is left alone, is abandoned by the family. And I'm thinking of the boy who went to learn about the shivers, for instance. His parents say, "Get out, we don't want you here." Or Hans the Hedgehog, nobody ever talks about that, a wonderful tale. And his parents say, "You're too ugly, we leave." But what he does is the same as Hansel and Gretel. He falls back on his own resources. And Hansel and Gretel work out a way to get free of the witch. But then, getting the idea isn't enough. That's it. If you're a pilgrim, you've got the ideas about how to rebel. Acting on the idea is what puts you into the next phase, which I call the one who fights peacefully for justice, the warrior lover. It's stage 4. Okay, and that's when they realize they have to turn on the witch and get rid of her, and they shove her in the oven, and they get out of the woods as fast as they can, because they've learned a lesson. They've learned the world is not always nice. Adults are not always trustworthy. Don't we tell this to our kids? Don't trust adults with sweets, with candies. They've learned something. And when they've learned something like that and worked together, they have mobilized their own sense of power. That's when I was talking a little earlier about the Frog King. I mean, the Frog King, or Frog Prince in Disney's version, he takes a risk. He risks his life, knowing that any woman worth her salt is going to try and kill him. If she's not going to try and kill him, she's a doormat, and why would you want to marry a doormat? So he takes a risk. You know, he might die. He might die. And she, the little princess, she is going against her promise, what her father told her to do. She's mad. She's outraged. Nobody is going to be in my bed, she says, unless it's a decent human being who's going to be my husband. Okay. So you could say that both of them at that point, they're risking their lives. They're risking something very important to them. As warrior lovers, they are fighting for the right to be taken seriously, to be loved. And so the prince gets hurled against, or the frog gets hurled against the wall. He turns himself into a prince because a spell has been broken. A spell. And you think, I wonder what that spell was. Some witch, perhaps, got to him. And we can speculate on this, but he turns himself, or gets turned into a prince. The spell is broken. Just as today, I see young couples in my counseling, and sometimes it takes the woman to turn to the guy and say, when are you going to shape up and get a job and support me and the kid? And that's when the guy goes, I guess I have to do that. And men don't grow up until somebody whacks them upside the head and says, come on, be a man. No.
I'm sure you probably didn't advise the lady to throw the guy against the wall, right? Yeah, I bet you that's not how the counseling went. It's like, have you tried throwing him against the wall, see if he changes? No, I haven't.
Let's try it.
Damn, I'm to the prince finally.
Yeah. So I think that's why Disney changed that, because they didn't want the possibility of a princess being cruel to animals.
Yeah.
I think that's why they changed it. And in that change, which is politically correct, they threw away the core of the story. And that's why I wrote the book, because the core of the story is, are these people going to grow up? Otherwise, when they ride off in their carriage at the end, all we get is, she's kind of spoiled and entitled and unpleasant, and he used to be a frog. Great. Instead of which, we're being asked to think of this in a different way. So I'm going to pause, as it were, in the story for a moment and ask about, symbols. And that is the princess. Yeah, she's the youngest princess. She's spoiled. She wants her daddy to look after her problem, get rid of her promise. She doesn't know what words mean yet, but she will by the end of the story. The frog, and believe me, frogs today, nobody thinks about frogs, but in 1812, which is when the Grimm brothers published their book, in Germany, everybody knew what a frog conveyed.
Yeah.
And a frog was a creature that showed you your water was clean. Your water is clean, it's safe to drink. But a frog, as everybody knew, every kid, even when I was young, every kid would see, frogs lay eggs. They turn into those little white balls with a little black dot in the middle. And then they become tadpoles and they swim around. And then eventually the tadpoles climb out of the water and start to breathe air. And then they turn into frogs. So everybody in Germany, in Europe, in 1812 would say a frog is a symbol of transformation. These things change from one thing into something completely other. They were water dwelling, now they're air breathing. Wow. Is this frog going to grow up? And then there's another thing that goes along with this, and this is kind of post-Freudian, you might say. The frog lives in the water. When he goes to collect the princess's golden ball, her rich toy that she's dropped, he swims right down into the depths. It's as though he's going he knows the depths of the human soul. And he's going down there to retrieve this golden object and bring it back to her. Almost as if he's saying, I know what it is to have to go deep inside myself. How about you?
Take on it. I like that.
Interesting.
I like that.
Well,
That's really cool.
Well,
You
thank
know,
you. I mean,
this-
really, she's never had to think about anything. He has been a prince. He's been turned into a frog. He's had a long time to think about what the heck life might be about. And he's gone way down. It's, sometimes it's what happens when people in high places actually lose their money or have to, or whatever. They have to rethink who they are. And that's a very powerful lesson.
Wow.
Today, you have a real prince, Prince Harry, over there, who's just left the royal family. He works for charities. He became a soldier. He was in action in Afghanistan, and he had to realize that although he was a prince, he's actually nobody that special.
Wow.
And that's really important to notice. He's just a human being. He has to know the core of himself. So that whole scene, which Disney changed, threw away, is absolutely powerfully, viscerally important to anybody reading the story. And this is just the first story. I mean, this is number one in the book. You know, there are lots more after this.
Yeah.
And suddenly you realize, oh, this isn't just, a fairy story. There are no fairies, for one thing. This is a story that is talking about how to get in touch with something powerful within yourself. What is it that allows you to survive as the lowest creature of the low, really, a frog? And what are the risks you take? Well, they find each other, they are due to be married, and they ride off in the carriage, and everybody forgets this bit, because as they're riding off in the carriage, what happens is there's a loud bang, and the king says, the frog king, he says, well, what was that noise? And Heinrich, the coachman, says, don't worry, he says, when you were turned into a frog, I had 3 iron bands placed around my heart so that my heart would not break. And you think, wow. And 3 times the iron bands go bang. And that lets you know a couple of things right away. And that is, here is a king, and his servant loves him. Loves him because he's a good person. And it also tells you how we put bonds around our hearts when we feel our hearts are breaking. And that when things change, when our hearts are remade, this person whom we love comes back to themselves, it is just a magical, transformative moment. Now, I've gone into that in a lot of detail because that is the point when these two become an inspiration to us. We know they've been warrior lovers, archetype level 4. They're now de facto king and queen. And the king and queen have to be able to make executive decisions and have to be able to decide how to run the kingdom. And the woman and the man have to work together. Oh, what a fantastic idea that is. It's not the man going off to run the kingdom and the little woman stays in the castle. They have to work together. The executive power of the stereotypical male and the, shall we say, the charitable loving power symbolized in the stereotypical women. You have to have them both. A king who doesn't love his subjects doesn't last very long.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And a king who loves his subjects too much gets pushed off the throne by someone else. So they've reached a fine level, or managerial level, you might say, level 5 of the archetypes, the king and queen. But when we see Heinrich with the bands, the iron bands around his heart, when they burst, we realize, oh yeah, they've got something more. they've got the ability to inspire others. And that's the sixth level of the archetype. That's what I call the magician. The magician doesn't make Heinrich a good man. Heinrich is able to become a good man. The magician is there, and because of who he or she is, they can change the energy. They can change the energy of the situation. It's not always the most powerful person who does that. Sometimes it's the weakest person in the room who can work the magic. It's grandma who can look at little Freddie and say, Freddie, be nice. And little Freddie, who's an absolute terror most of the time, goes, yes, grandma.
Yeah.
What happened? A little bit of magic that changes the possibilities. Now, that's a very quick rundown of the 6 archetypes. But if you look at 3,000 years of literature from Homer onwards, every single major character in what we call the Western canon, and actually most other stories that exist outside the canon, have the main character going through these stages absolutely regularly. And if that happens, you've got a good story. In tragedy, they get so far and then they slip back. And that's what makes it tragic. Now, I think that was something that people knew viscerally for hundreds of years, but never bothered to write down.
You know, and you made a really good point. I mean, about changing the story. What you've done is you have really gone through and you've taken away some of the character lessons that, like you said, just as you grow, and even like me and my wife as a couple, you know, this isn't something like, you know, like the Sleeping Beauty. She's laying there, you go up, kiss, and then you ride off into the, you know, it just, you realize in real life, there has to be a partnership. There has to be give and take. There has to be, I rely on her just as much as she relies on me. And
Exactly.
where Disney took it to where here's this damsel who's so distraught, can't do anything, and this guy's got to come sweep her off her feet and rescue, and everything is grand. Like you said, now it makes it to where she's not very strong.
Yes.
And you don't realize, like, even then, it's like, I can't even begin to tell you how much I rely on my wife.
Good.
And so for me, she's not looking for me to rescue her. I'm not looking for it. It's the same thing. It's just, we know, just almost like instinctual. We know what each other, you know, at the point when we see somebody starting to fall, we know when to come in there and help.
Yeah, good. That's absolutely beautiful. I mean, working together is the name of the game, isn't it?
Yes.
If it's just one of you doing everything, the situation falls to pieces right away. So yeah, that's beautiful. And those are the aspects we go through.
Yeah, that's why I think some of those things are lost. You know, which the beauty, you know, everybody likes, you know, that's like, ooh, you know, the juicy part of the stories. Everybody wants to get it. You know, you get into, you know, some of the crazy Rumpelstiltskin. You get into the ones they're really, you know, it's what for anybody that's watching. It's stuff. You know, one, obviously, there's a great book to kick you off. It's called Princess and Frogs and Ugly Sisters by Dr. You know, Alan G. Hunter. Get that one to start off. And after that piques your interest, go and look in, you know, you can find, I'm sure, this, you know, vintage books, you know, this, like the one I have, the 60 Tales of the Grimm, you know, Brothers Grimm. This one, I mean, I'm just even talking here, I think I'm going to start reading some of these to my son.
Well, you know, there are, I reread them fairly regularly, obviously. And I really like the translation by Ralph Mannheim. He's one of the more accurate translators. Manheim, Ralph Mannheim. And that matters because sometimes translators take a few liberties and sometimes they change the stories. But he has all 212 stories. Some of them are not very good, of course. Some of them are some kind of offensive, in fact.
Yes.
But one of the things that we have to recall about the Brothers Grimm is that they were serious scholars, and they went out and found the very best tales they could from what they felt were the purest sources. And they found village storytellers, and they interviewed them, and they made sure, is this the way it is? And what they noticed was the storytellers would tell the story and would always tell it word for word exactly the same. And you think, wow. Well, they were probably illiterate, okay, so they'd remembered it. But the point was that this was a piece of storytelling that mattered in its integrity. You couldn't slice and dice it. And if you can imagine how people would have heard it in the villages in those days, they would have been sitting in a little cottage. The storyteller would have come to town, so everybody would have crowded into a cottage. They'd have shoved the horses and the cows off to one end, It would be by firelight after the day was done. And just like I'm sure with your kids as well, they would say, oh, can you tell us the one about Cinderella? And the storyteller would tell the story. And imagine, it's flickering firelight, your imagination can work.
Oh, yeah.
And then they're likely to say, just like kids, they're very likely to have said, it's a great story. Tell it to us again. And they would tell it. Now, that's an amazing thought for us today, where we see something and it's gone. So what? It's gone. Instagram, there it is, gone.
Yep.
These people lived on repetition, and each time they repeated a story to themselves, they found more depth in it. And so, in some ways, it's lovely that what Disney does, but we need the printed stories to be able to refer back to again and again. I go, oh yeah, that's how that goes. I wonder why that detail is there.
Yeah, I agree. I agree that I feel that more people. I mean, I'm a big homer for it. I think more people should read these ones, because you get kind of both. I mean, obviously, not everybody wants to have the serious, get smacked in the head with my story all the time. I mean, that's buyer beware. It's like when you're tucking your 3 or 4 year old in, you might want to pick and choose. You might want to pick the Golden Goose story. You might want to pick something that's not as brutal, as trying to tell them, the Hansel and Gretel one. That's probably not the best one to
probably a bit hard on me.
Might want to slow down on that one. But there's, one of the other aspects of your book too. I think if I remember, let's look here. I think it's page 151. It's chapter 14, the Little Briar Rose.
Yes,
where you talk about the order of children. Just it's like in where. That how that plays a role in where children plays. Like Austin has 3. I mean, so this would be something more like for him. I have 1.
Mm-hmm.
Chris has 3.
Oh my. Okay.
Austin has 3. So Austin has 3. Chris has 2, and I have 1. So there you go. 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so you've got the full gamut right there. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. I mean, the Grimm brothers' tales very often talk about birth order. And how the experience is different for each kid, and it is. I mean, you think about it. The first child arrives; it has the total attention of at least one adult, usually 2, and that's a very privileged position. And for a while, it's like, okay, great, I'm fully conversant with who these people are, and they are. I'm a fully paid up member of the family. Okay, but then if a second child arrives, suddenly you've got a baby who takes a lot of attention, and of course there's going to be some rivalry. I've certainly seen kids be very jealous of the new children arriving, and I've seen kids being very loving of the new child arriving.
They're mean.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about there. So, and sometimes that's beautiful, and sometimes there's a lot of tension. And the Grimm brothers' tales are absolutely full of these. Where the third child is concerned, sometimes the third child gets a bit of a rough time because, well, 3 children is a lot of children. And number 3 sometimes gets a little neglected, you might say, or left to bring him or herself up alone. These are the facts of life. These are what the Grimm brothers, peers and peasants in the field and farmers in the field saw. But they didn't have a way to articulate it, and they didn't really have a way to discuss it. So the tales often feature an eldest, a middle, and a youngest who are in some sort of conflict. And the conflict would be very familiar to the listeners, and they would say, oh, okay, it's not just my family where the kids are always fighting each other. Oh, right, this happens all the time. So what you have in A Little Briar Rose is definitely an example of sibling levels, you might say, in the famous story. Well, let's look at an even more famous story than that one. There is the boy who went forth to find out about the shivers, and his brother, his elder brother, is the perfect elder brother. He does everything that's right, and the family loves him, and they think he's great. And he has no trouble being afraid, because he is. But the second child doesn't understand. What's this fear stuff? What's this fear stuff? He doesn't get it. And in fact, so little does he get it that he's just not afraid. And you sometimes find that where the elder child is a little timid. I see it in my grandkids. The elder child is a little timid, knows there's danger, and the younger one says, let's do this. And there they are, swinging upside down from the monkey bar 12 feet up in the air, and you think, oh, God, you know. And the older one's going, I'm not doing that. You know? Well,
That's awesome. She just runs for the ocean.
Yeah. That's my girl.
So, you know, these are the everyday things of families, certainly the everyday things of German families in the year 1800. And the Grimm brothers' tales, again and again, look at that in a very interesting way. So the boy who wanted to find out about the shivers, it translates different ways, he can't be afraid. He's just not afraid of anything. I've met a few people like that, and they're always second sons, and they're just not afraid. And he goes through a number of adventures in a haunted castle. He can't take the ghosts seriously. You know, there are monstrous cats that are, he can't take them seriously. He just beats them up and throws them out the window. But then he wins the treasure, and the king says, well, you must marry my daughter. And he says, oh, fine, great, terrific. So he marries the daughter, and it's not happily ever after. And you think, well, what's going wrong? And he says, I can't find out about the shivers. And that, it's a wonderful tale, and that is when the princess says, I don't know what to do with him. He only wants to. And that's when the princess's maid servant, so probably an older woman, says, I've got this. So she waits until the young man is asleep in his bed, cozy, happy, and then she takes a bucket of cold water with a little fish in it, and she dumps it on his head. And of course he goes, ah! You know, and he feels the fish go, ah! And he realized, you know, I'm afraid, I'm startled, I'm afraid. And you think, okay, so he's learned out about the shivers. Great, terrific. What does it mean? Well, I'll tell you, it doesn't take us too much pushing for us to realize that if you want a loving relationship, you have to be able to be vulnerable. And it's not until he can show that he is vulnerable, he's surprised, he's afraid. It's not until he shows he can be vulnerable that he can actually love anyone else properly, or she can love him.
That's cool. Yeah. No, that's all. I
It's right there in the story, and yet, you know, it's not one you hear everybody talking about, and yet it's so important.
I'm going to be reading these a lot differently as we. It's going to be one of the. It was through this aspect as I'm reading your book, and you know, and that one to him now. yeah, there's going to be so many different aspects. I mean, prior to the show, I mentioned it to you a little bit. I was going to kind of where for me, I always took there was an aspect of the seven deadly sins
Yes.
that were usually, and because I always took from their stories that there was always some moral tale underlying that was being told.
Yeah.
I didn't know, I don't know if you, as you're through your research, if you've noticed that as well, if that seems to be just, if there was an overarching, like, this is a story that kind of just shows greed. Envy, Cinderella would be envy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And we could go through the list quite easily. Sloth is, of course, many of the characters who come to grief are slothful brothers, actually, elder brothers usually. They're lazy. Yes, the seven deadly sins are right there because, of course, the people who were reading these tales were living in farmland, and so they were almost certainly Catholic, and they would have been brought up on the seven deadly sins. And so these tales have many repetitions of these seven deadly sins, and also, which is to me very interesting, there are some very good stories which have to do with what I call the seven deadly virtues. And the seven deadly virtues include being too nice to people. There's one called the Golden Bird, and the youngest son there is the one who rescues his brothers, and he's so nice. And every time he's nice to rotten people, it comes and gets him. So there's the seven deadly sins. You're absolutely right, and that's a wonderful point you make. And there's also, what about the virtues? Some of those can lead you into trouble too. And in fact, in the Golden Bird, it's only when the young man, he's been guided by a fox throughout, and the fox asks him, "Shoot me, cut off my head and my paws." He says, "No, I can't do that, you've been too nice." And then eventually the fox comes back and says, "Come on, now you've got to shoot me and cut off my head and paws." And he says, "Yeah, you're right." And so he shoots him, cuts off his head and paws, takes the carcass back to the castle, whereupon it turns in to his wife's brother. And you think, oh, so he finally took some advice from his wife's brother. Okay, he should have done that all along. When do we listen to advice, even if it's not very much to our taste? When do we listen to that advice? We don't. We listen to what fits our nature. And that's the same, of course, with Faithful Johannes, number 4 in the book. Faithful Johannes gives advice to the young king. He doesn't like the advice. In fact, if I can just jump into part of that story, Faithful Johannes knows there's a prophecy that the young king is going to be killed, but he can't tell anyone, because otherwise he, Faithful Johannes, will be turned to stone. So when the young king arrives from his voyage to collect his bride, there's a beautiful horse prancing around. But Faithful Johannes knows that if the king gets on the horse will run away and the king will never be found again. So he rushes up to the horse, and in the story he draws a pistol and blows its brains out.
Wow.
And you think, yeah. And the king goes, okay, but he's my faithful servant. Okay, right. So the king then goes into the castle where these new clothes are laid out for his wedding. You think, wow, gold and silver, lace and wonderful things. Faithful Johannes knows that if he puts on that shirt, that beautiful embroidered shirt, it will burst into flames and kill him. And so as soon as he sees the clothes, he takes them, throws them in the fire. And the young king goes, okay, this is Faithful Johannes. I guess I can trust everything he does, even though I really like the cut of that shirt, and I kind of miss the horse. But anyway, and then, and this is where it gets very interesting, the wedding is solemnized, and the bride and groom are dancing. The king and the queen are dancing together. And suddenly the queen falls down in a dead faint. And Faithful Johannes knows from the prophecy, which he's forbidden to tell anyone about because he'll be turned into stone, what he must do. So he does exactly what he must do. He rushes up to the queen, rips open her bodice, the front of her shirt, bites her breast, yes, sucks blood, and spits it out. Okay? And it saves her life. But the king looks at this and says, wait, I got married 3 seconds ago, and here's this guy ripping a cloak. Whoa! And so he condemns his faithful advisor to death. And when faithful Johannes is on the scaffold, he says, look, here was the prophecy, I had to do this, I had to do this, and I had to do this, and I know now that was the right thing to do, and guess what? I'm just about to turn into stone. And he does. And we realize then that there were 3 lessons. The first lesson is, if you're a young king, don't get intoxicated by fast horses and flashy cars and, showing off in public. First lesson, that was the horse. He didn't want to hear it, but it was learned for him, as it were, by being demonstrated. Second lesson is, if you're a king, it's not about the clothes. Forget about the clothes. It's about who's inside the clothes. And third lesson is, this may be your queen, but she's a woman just like any other woman. Her blood may be blue blood, but you have to spit it out just like any other blood, and it saves her life. And you realize that for the young king to accept that advice would have been almost impossible if someone had sat down beside him. He wouldn't have got it. But the lessons are so strong to him and to us that we realize, okay, there's some real advice here in a very strong format if we're listening for it. And that's the thing. These are strong images. People getting killed and have things cut off them and turned to stone. These are strong images. And to cycle back, faithful Johannes is like dad. Who listens to the advice from their dad? Well, I wish I'd listened to more advice from my old man, because he was right, and now he's been dead all these years. I can look back and say, oh, he's right about that. Oh yeah, he was right about that too. Yeah, I didn't listen. We never do. So this sort of leads back on what you were saying, I think.
Yeah, no, that's the part. It just, it's kind of keep saying, over and over. It's just, that's the part that I loved about these things, is that they were not only just a cool story, reading, but it was something that you actually, and I think you've artfully done it in this book too. You've broken it down even more, like just the way you describe those things. There's a moral, but I think you brought it even another level to it, to where even like the counseling thing. These are some tenets that, it's a cool story about Rapunzel. It's a cool story about Rumpelstiltskin. These cool things. But if you actually break it down, you realize there's some of these aspects that when you think about these tales, that if you practice these even in your own life, you can realize there's some things like you said, it's important to listen.
Yeah. I'm right with you. I mean, I started reading the tales out of some general interest, and then I realized, this is telling me some really profound truths I perhaps had forgotten to ask about. And I use it in my counseling practice as well. Sometimes I say, take a look at this tale and let's talk about it next time. And sometimes people come back and go, oh my goodness, would that describe my situation or what? And I say, okay, serves its purpose then. That's what literature is for. These are healing tales. These are teaching tales.
Yes, indeed.
Turning them into entertainment may be good for money, but it's not very good for education of the spirit. And we need people's spirits to be educated. We need people to be aware, so that marriages stay together or couples stay together, that people grow. What I see is a lot of people who don't know how to grow because no one's ever asked them to. Just like the Frog King. No one ever asked, made a demand before.
Well, I had a question for you.
Yeah.
Well, it's very interesting, but do you think at any point in time Disney stole these stories, or they just came up with like, oh, let's just rewrite, the history that was made with these stories? So
Yeah.
what is your take on that? Do you think Disney stole them?
Well, I think, of course they appropriated them, they took them, and they changed them, and they saw a commercial enterprise. I don't think for one second they considered that these stories had anything in them apart from customer recognition level. Everybody knows about Snow White, and so it became Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Suddenly we have a whole lot of extra characters who are cute and live in the forest, and there are bunnies and deer. Disney is a business, and so it does raise the whole point of who do you trust to tell you the truth? Do you trust Disney, which wants to make money? Do you trust Hollywood, which wants to make money? Who do you trust to tell you the truth? Because people will tell you whatever makes you feel good and makes you buy the popcorn and the merchandise and like my little granddaughters, the little pink tutus and hairbands and things that they love. And they love that stuff. But if we're talking about what's worth listening to, do we want to feed ourselves on a diet of sugared donuts, or do we want a healthy diet that's going to make us think and try to discover more about what it means to be alive? Do we want a diet that says women are feeble and need to be rescued, which I think most people would shout a resounding no to? But that was the early Disney stuff. The girls were all prepubescent, fluttery, and they needed to be rescued. And of course, they were rescued. How lovely. They've made a lot of money for Disney. They've produced a major animated feature every year since 1939, I think it is. Every year. And there is an apocryphal rumor, I don't know if it's a true statement or not, that Hitler's favorite movie was Snow White because it showed women as being totally subservient. And he liked that. I say that with sort of, oh my God, really?
Yeah.
What's the message that's coming across? Grimm brothers did not have that in their version. Their version shows Snow White learning how to be a woman and how to run a household full of these little dwarves who are troublesome. She rules them with an iron rod, In other words, she's very good at running a household, which in those days was a major, major concern. And today we say, oh, someone's running the household. Well, I've tried to run a household on my own. It's hard work. In 1800, if you were a, quote, housewife, you were not only bringing up the children and keeping the place clean, but you were making the butter and the cheese, you were baking the bread, you were giving people medicines made from herbs. So you had to know all about that when they felt sick. You had to know all about doctoring. You had to help slaughtering the pigs. You had to castrate the lambs. You had to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
It wasn't the 50s housewife who's sitting there with a glass of gin, her feet up on the coffee table.
Cocktail party. Yeah. No.
No, the 50s housewife dying of boredom, basically. So, these are strong stories that, if we can look at them through a slightly more sympathetic lens, can tell us a lot about being fully grown-up adults functioning in the world.
Do you still, so you have an active practice there? You live in Massachusetts, correct?
Yeah, and just outside Boston, yeah.
And, obviously I want you to plug that, for people to come talk, if they need to talk with you.
Yeah, these days it's all by Zoom because of COVID, but so I have a counseling practice, and it's always fascinating. And I write these books, so that's what I do.
And for everybody that doesn't know, I was just looking at a little bit of your bio too. I mean, it's just, I mean, you've got a pretty, background, man, that I brag about. I mean, a doctorate in literature from Oxford.
Yeah, I'm proud of that. Yeah,
that's not something everybody's just walking around saying, I've got a doctorate from Oxford. I mean,
No. Well, I don't like to brag, but I have got a doctorate from Oxford, and I have been studying literature for nearly 50 years now, and I've travelled the world, and I have 12 books, and I work with clients on the stories they tell themselves about who they are, and I work with clients writing their memoirs.
Now, do you still have tenure at Curry College?
Yeah, I'm an emeritus professor at Curry College. Yeah.
Wow, here we are, three bearded, jokers from, Central Florida, and here we have, somebody who is, I have maybe that much education, right?
Yeah, but you've got this wonderful radio program, and you've got these great beards too. Oh,
thank you.
I'm really envious.
Yeah, it's one of those. Just let it go. Just let.
Yeah, I tried letting it go. It just looked awful. So you're very lucky.
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, I think my son's the responsibility for this part of my.
I think you might have got that.
But we wanted to, time. I wanted to thank you so much, everybody. Please pick up Princess Frogs and Ugly Sisters, from Dr. Alan G. Hunter. This is from the little bit I got it yesterday. So
okay.
So I laid, I went getting ready to go to bed. I was sitting there flipping through some pages, and and I'm really looking forward to continuing through the book and finishing it. So.
Well, you're very kind, and thank you so much for inviting me onto this show, because I just love to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, in any time, like I said, if you come up with new stuff, let me know, because I'd be more than happy to look into the story too, because this is a great companion in itself to the other stories, but by itself, I mean, I recommend people pick this book up. It's should be available through most places, Amazon, everybody.
Amazon's the easiest place to get it from, or you can go straight to Inner Traditions, who are now the publisher, who own Findhorn. They bought Findhorn Press.
Nice. Well, sir, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I love this. This is great.
Yeah, I hope we've brought exposure for a few people that have not, and you've also brought in a new passion for me to. This book has been sitting on my bookshelf for a while, and it's been a while since I've actually physically held this book, and it's bringing back nostalgia for me. So it's pretty cool. So I thank you personally for that. You did that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, have a great evening. Tell the family thank you for sharing their time with with us, and we will be in touch. And
I look forward to it.
Fantastic evening, sir.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. You've been very kind too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. All right, so everybody, like I said, pick up that book. It's really good from what I've read, and so I got to pick one of the stories read to Chase, tonight. Bedtime. So, I don't know. Maybe.
I mean,
Hansel and Gretel. I'll read them that one.
Save that for when he's acting up pretty bad. That's when you save that one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So this episode, once again, was brought by Broad's Beard Care. His product takes care of these beards, like Dr. Hunter said, these beards that we've all sprouted on our faces. We think Kelly, check out our new signature blend. You buy a bottle of that. Not only do you support us, you're also supporting him. Like I said, and for every bottle, so you're going to help him rescue a gnome. I said those gnomes. He's like the Willy Wonka beard oil. These gnomes sing him songs, telling him the morals of what he should have learned from that day. And so Yep. So the more he gets, the better the songs get, because 1 or 2 is not very, melodical. When you have 20, 30 around there, it becomes a little bit more of a, an event like the show. So go support Kelly and ourselves. I know. We'll stop here. Nettie Cakes 407, 407-923, 2898, Central Florida area. There, she'll hook you up with a great cake outside of the Central Florida area. It is going to be amazing tasting whatever arrives to you. We don't know, but here it's going to look like a cake. When it gets to you, not so much.
It's spoon. She'll send you a spoon. That's all you need.
Yeah, exactly. But everybody go to 3beerspodcast.com, patreon.com/3beerspodcast. Check us out on our social medias. We are on YouTube and Facebook Live. Thanks again, Dr. Alan Hunter. Thank you, Mark Eddy, for getting us in touch with them. Thank you, Killian Nanny Cakes. And we will see everybody at next show. Everybody have a great night. Thank you for watching.